This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:06 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home in Port St. Lucie, Florida, right in the center of the Treasure Coast. And it's a beautiful Friday morning after that impressive rain that came out of like nowhere last night. We went into a restaurant before a meeting, and it was wonderful and balmy, and you know, that kind of wonderful Chamber of Commerce kind of weather that Florida has much of the time. And, you know, kind of debated, should we eat outside? And went inside to the restaurant, and we're sitting there eating away, not that long, like about 35, 40 minutes, not a fancy dinner. And go to get up and leave, and my gosh, it was like, okay, who's building boats here, folks? It was impressive. So I got drenched all the way to the bone, as they say.
Well, I was thinking about you last week. We had the Young Floridian celebration at Indian River State College. And it's my, 25th year of judging, wow. I was judging the jocks.
Okay.
So these athletes, I was in a state of shock. I mean, not one of our 7 athletes was below the top 10 of their class.
Wow.
These are athletes.
Okay.
And I'm going, oh, my God. And then you look and see how many hours they volunteer. And, you know, it could be 200, 300, 400. And I'm going, wow. And then how many are on track to graduate from IRSC before they get out of high school.
Yeah.
Because of the dual enrollment.
Because of the dual enrollment and the scheduling of the semesters. I always joke about, not joke about, but chuckle to myself about it. Because, yeah, the dual enrolls get their AA, if they've completed the AA degree, a week or two before they graduate from high school.
Yeah.
And
I'm shocked that 5 of our 7 were dual enrolled.
Yeah, you know, people have no appreciation in general of how incredible Indian River State College is. And I don't say that because I'm a professor there. I was like, you know, as I found out how fantastic the college was, I was like, wow, I am honored to be among the faculty. You know,
you should be. It's a great school.
It's an incredible school. And you know, they don't just give lip service to the idea that we're dedicated to student success. They really do have the systems in place to facilitate students learning in a variety of different ways. So, you know, we know that we've got oral learners, we've got visual learners, we've got tactile learners, we've got all different kinds of people. And I always joke with my students, because, you know, I'm over 30, obviously. You know,
I didn't know that.
You know, it's funny because we always talk about ask your hairdresser. Your hairdresser knows for sure. And I actually did ask my hairdresser what she thought my age was, and the look on her face when I told her what my real age was pretty good. So
I joke with the basketball players all the time. I've got ties older than you.
Yeah, I'm sure I have clothing older than most of the students. You know, because they are there. It's a young. Well, the dual enrolls are certainly young, but it's a great mix because we've got some folks that have come back to school. Mm-hmm. Florida's got some great programs. If you don't yet have a bachelor's, you can go back to school, and the state will support it and help you in that process. People don't know that. There's a lot of gems connected to Indian River State College of which people are just not aware and need to take advantage.
Well, we have, 15 or 16 bachelor's programs now.
Yeah, and growing every semester.
Yeah.
There's more and more and more. And, more different ways to take it. We have, accelerated classes in during the year, not just in summer, so that if you can only commit and you've got a trip or this or whatever, you can schedule your semester. Now, you're going to, if you're smart, take fewer classes in that accelerated period, or you're going to be working your tail off. I can say that because for my PhD, I did get permission at one point to take 5 classes in a semester, and I worked my tail off.
5?
5. I only did that to myself for. But it was impressive couple of weeks, and I don't think there was a whole lot of sleep that happened in those 2 months. There were 8-week classes, and so they were very intense. That's 8 15 to 20 page papers, plus your signature piece for the class. So yeah.
It's funny.
Yours truly did not sleep much that last week.
I'll bet. But I was thinking of you. There's this one girl who wound up winning, as a matter, at least in my mind. I don't know who were the other judges, but she was talking about, I wake up at 4:18 every day. And so one of the judges says, not 4:20, no, 4:18. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, I've got a friend like that who we were going somewhere, and she said to me, "Well, I can do this at 7:38 plus or minus 10 minutes," and I'm like, 7:38 plus or minus 10 minutes.
I love it.
Your band is bigger than your precision,
Oh my God.
But and I'm knowing this person, I'm sure that she did it plus or minus 10 minutes to that minute. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. But, that's the engineer in me. It's like, yeah.
I just don't understand how in the world these kids do what they do on virtually no sleep. I mean, most of them went to bed at 12 midnight. Got up at 4 or 5, and it's like, oh my God.
They do have more stamina at that age, and I also do see students going in class.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And since the majority of the students are not sleeping, I'm assuming I'm not that bad a lecturer. That and the classes are interactive, and obviously you just kind of ignore those that crash on their desk, because what else are you going to do? And then they're going to be missing stuff, and they're going to be asking questions, and you can figure out who and what.
Yeah, who's paying attention?
Who's paying attention?
Sure. So, oh yeah.
But again, Indian River, a gem, a wonderful gem on the Treasure Coast, with campuses all the way up into Sebastian, out to Okeechobee, and all the way down in Stewart. And I mean, I don't know too many state colleges with that many campuses where you can access so many different things. And yes, you have to pay attention when you're registering for classes, so you know which campus you're on for which class. But the fact that they offer so many things in so many campuses, so incredible. And how beautiful the campuses are. And they do keep the buildings up to date. They're not wastefully lavish, but they're tastefully up to date. Mm-hmm. So you've got smart boards, you've got professors who can record their lectures. I don't tend to do that. I when I record a lecture, I do it in my studio at home. My studio, quote unquote. It's the backwash like this is behind me here. Not a fancy studio as some people might think, but wherever you work is your studio. And we've just got this incredibly great college with wonderful advisors helping the students pick good courses, helping them plan their programs, and low cost, with an incredible. A lot of IRSC graduates are employed, and not just at base level jobs, but at higher than average.
I was shocked, and of course, obviously, we have the Startup Talk Show from Indian River State College now, in its 5th year, and I know Tom Kindred talks about the difference between just say a high school degree in the Tri-County area versus an IRSC degree. And the difference in income for a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's staggering.
Yeah, it's huge. So this is something that clearly people should take advantage of, need to do, and they're missing out on a lot of things. And I think that young people and sometimes their parents do not have a perception of the long-term impact of not making those decisions, of not pushing that. Is it harder on the student? Yes, it is. They have to work extra hard to make the cut of the dual enrollment. And I think the schools have grade requirements and this and that. But if you meet the requirements, it's available to every student and it's
Sure.
it's a great deal. The state is paying your tuition.
Yeah.
If you're dual enrolled, they even buy your textbooks. Now, to that end, I did have a dual enroll. 3 weeks into the course, say, "Well, I haven't gotten my textbook yet." You need to bug your counselor and get your textbook.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You need to say to them, "Yes, we do need the textbook," and get it. So there's those things, and so many benefits to doing it. And I love teaching the classes. The classes are great. I've got Intro to Humanities, Ethics, and Intro to Philosophy this semester. And, enjoy.
What I thought was very interesting, of our 7 kids, 6 of them are going into medical in one way or another, whether it's nursing, the IRSC nursing program, rehab.
That's a lot of the students are in nursing and in other medical professions.
Well, and the nursing shortages that we read about, and what we're going to have in the next 20 years is going to be another staggering number.
Yeah. So those are really important professions, and we've got a tremendous law enforcement program and technologies. There's just so many different things, and I like to tell the students, that's why you have to have humanities classes, because we're trying to balance all these things. And we're trying to teach you how to think, not what to think, but how to think.
Right.
And so I do. I love it. And, I have some of my students keep track with me. They'll dash me a note and say, "Hey, I'm up at USF or I'm UF or wherever," and let me know their future, or they're out working already. Because I've been there already enough years.
Sure.
And so I kind of love that. And I love that a lot, actually.
And I don't know whether you have the same effect on you that it does on me, but being around those kids really
keeps
me young.
Keeps you young.
Yeah.
Well, and it helps you keep some perspective on things. And hopefully they get some perspective from me. I always joke with them that, when I was little, the dinosaurs were in the backyard. Of course, we call those chickens, but
yeah,
that would be the science of it. But people, there's a reason why they have scales on their feet.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting kind of thing, right? We now know that dinosaurs did have feathers. They've been able to find some feathers in the fossils. So, feathers are not as new in evolution as we like to think they are. They've been around for a good long time. Now, they don't look quite as beautiful as a peacock's feather, and they certainly weren't quite that type. These things have changed over time.
I thought of you. While I was out with the flu, I was watching one of the sports networks on Israeli basketball. And, of course, they have a lot of time off when they play in Israel and Europe. Yeah. And they were going on the religious tours to see, Jerusalem. Yeah. And it's just like, it was so incredible to see some of that. And, of course, I haven't been there, but...
well, maybe sometime we'll do a joint synagogue WPSL trip to Israel.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be cool?
Well, Father Alto goes there all the time. St. Bernadette's. Yeah. They always seem to go there.
There's wonderful trips that can be had. So maybe we'll talk about that down
the
road.
What a great idea. Yeah.
So maybe we can put that together, folks. Let us know if that interests the folks that are listening. Or you can give me any other question that you might like to have cross a rabbi's eyes, as they say, at 772-340-1590, or in this case, cross a rabbi's ears.
The one thing I'll say about the Israelis, and it's one of the sponsors of this show was this big hospital that is relatively close to the border, and they've been victims of shellings a lot. And they now have, as part of that hospital, it's 5 stories underground.
Yeah, so
sealed.
that it's protected, yeah.
And it's a full hospital, underground. And I'm thinking, this is so sad, but in a way, it's like so
smart.
Future thinking, too.
Yeah, it's smart. You have a different perspective when you live in those conditions. And now, so we can also talk a little bit about people who don't see the things that are around them, because it's fun to watch Americans go to Israel and not see what is, clearly evident. And it's our rose-colored glasses.
Well, when you live there, did you see shellings and stuff like that? The time that you were
I didn't
there?
so much because excuse me. I was there twice. I was there in 69 and in 73. And in 73, I didn't see much of it, but I tended to sit in the city. There's actually a funny story about that, which is we were sitting in my apartment, and all of a sudden there's the sound of F4s coming really close over the top.
Oh, boy.
Now, well, yeah, but Israel has the F4s, not.
Okay.
It wasn't anybody else.
I got you.
It was a practice for the 25-year Independence Parade.
Okay.
And what's funny about that, you get into habits, and we actually broke a habit, my roommate and I, because we were both Americans, young American girls living in Israel, and young women, excuse me. And we had fallen into the habit of listening to the English news, both on the radio. We didn't have TV, so it was on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have TV, folks. And we didn't have cell phones, and we didn't have iPads.
Were you listening to the BBC or something?
No, it was Jerusalem, but we sometimes did listen to the BBC, not as often. They wouldn't have had the schedule though for the practice runs for the overflights, and we later learned that they had been announced on the Hebrew edition of the news, because of course the English part of it was shorter, understandably, and it just didn't strike them as being, I guess, critical to translate into the English news. So we learned to listen to the Hebrew news, to work a little harder to understand it. And because just as newscasters do here, they speak quickly, and they speak in a relatively high Hebrew. And so, you have to think if it's not your... And I was raised speaking some Hebrew, but my dad didn't teach me all the words that they use.
Well, yeah.
Because they just didn't come up. And they aren't in scriptures. F4 is not in scriptures. And sorry, folks, it's not there. Yeah. And so we started listening to the Israeli news so that we got the schedule of little things that kind of did impact your daily life. I can remember in the apartment hitting the deck because the plane sounded like they were overhead. Which they were. They were doing a strafing run on Jerusalem. Yeah.
Wow.
My dog panicked, too, which is really kind of funny. We had a poodle from Israel that was living in our apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that time, no, outside of that little incident, I really didn't see anything. There was... My mother, we had a weekly phone call back home, and my mother would talk about stuff that happened, and I wouldn't know it. Unless it was really significant, it didn't.
Sure.
It didn't make the news. That's one of the things that people don't realize, that news, the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, but if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead.
Yeah.
Right? That's the other side of it. So if it's not a big deal, you don't hear about it. And now my other experience, there were a couple of things about being in Israel in 72, 73, which was that a lot of the Nixon stuff was going on, and so we saw it from the BBC and from the Israeli standpoint, and it was a very different take than Americans were having.
Yeah.
And we also, that was the time of the Olympics when the athletes were killed.
Oh, Munich. Oh, God.
And the Jerusalem Post goes to, here's a newspaper phrase, goes to bed earlier than the Hebrew news, and so the Jerusalem Post carried the headlines of being rescued, because that's what the German government had released before the fact. It's very dangerous to release your news release before you effectively accomplish the mission. And so the Jerusalem Post had wonderful headlines, and of course the Hebrew had the tragedy. And again, we walked into the supermarket and we're looking around and we're like, why is everybody so glum? And your eyes look down at the headlines as you're walking in, and of course we scanned the English, both I and my roommate, and so we were like, hey, they were rescued, this is good, why is everybody so down in the face? And of course we got slapped with the Hebrew newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, another great way to make Americans look like we don't have any clue of what's going on in the world. Which,
and in a way we don't.
And in a way we didn't. Yeah, we had no idea.
Okay, again, while I was off, this two-state solution.
Okay, you really do want to talk about that, don't you?
Can it work?
I think that if we could get enough of the outsiders out of the negotiation, that it would have a much better shot. There's got to be either that or some other creative solution. But right now, there's just too many people invested in keeping that conflict going.
I saw somebody from the BBC who said that run-of-the-mill Palestinians, just general
the people on the street,
they want peace.
Yeah,
they're tired.
People
are
tired of war. People are tired of shelling. So there's some things that have to happen in the international community, right? They're not getting the weapons from nowhere.
Right.
Okay,
exactly,
folks?
Yeah. They probably have USA labels on it.
We're not going to talk about whose labels they've got, but there's everybody's got some unfortunate benefit in keeping the conflict going in the Middle East. And some of that's messianic stuff. Right, the people who want there to be this cataclysmic war coming out of the Middle East, and I'm sorry, what God wants that? Really, think about that a moment, folks. What God that created the world wants you to destroy part of it? That just doesn't make any logical sense to me. I'm sorry. So that's the big issue. Are there people on the ground actively working to create a better peaceful situation? Absolutely. Imagine what Israel and its neighbors could do if there wasn't all of this money and attention put into security and into guns.
It's funny, that the basketball team I was telling you about in Tel Aviv, they have a Palestinian night. And they have, the basketball team, and they sell out the crowds. They have, I guess, Palestinian style foods, if you will, at this game, and it's totally peaceful. I mean, they're all having a great time.
There are several cooperative things that go on. There's a gentleman. You can Google him and look his stuff up. Gershon Baskin, who lived.
I've heard the name. Yeah.
Well, he is one of the negotiators that helped get the release of Gilad Sharon. So, Gilad Shalit, rather. I'm sorry, misspoke his last name. His dad lived just south of us here in Florida, so he would occasionally be here in state visiting. He lives in Jerusalem, and he helps. He works with the Palestinians and listens to them. And, there are groups that work. When I was in Tucson, we actually had Gershon and I forget the gentleman who travels with him, but they came through and they talked to the synagogues and they talked to the mosques and they talked to the general public and just kind of let people know a little bit of what's going on the ground than what bleeds leads.
Right.
I don't fault the media at all for wanting to sell newspapers, wanting to sell listenership. And people are gory attentive.
Yeah.
Right.
I hate to say it, but you're right.
People are gory attentive. People look at an accident to see if there's blood. Right. There's just something about, did they bleed, that people want to, at some gut level, want to know. And I don't know if that's some kind of an instinctive danger alert system or what it is. But in any event, so that's part. It's a systemic problem, and we need to have a sea change in the consciousness of humans to move away from some of that and to looking for other things. But it's not going to come easily because people have this visceral gut response to things and want to hear about it. We saw the same thing, Desert Shield. People wanted to listen because they wanted to find out if the Americans got clobbered, including Americans, right? And I worked at Goodyear when that was going on, and they actually piped the daily briefings into the atrium, and we could all go and watch it. And everybody did. Everybody left their desk to go see what was happening. And that was kind of a if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, really.
And even though casualties were so minimal for what was anticipated, it was the potential of them, I think, that attracted a lot of people. Unfortunately.
But like whoever thought we'd be in Afghanistan for almost 20 years.
Yeah, we need to change how we look at things, and we need to change some of the basis of the economy here and elsewhere so that some of those resources can be devoted. I was actually thinking about that earlier today. I was thinking about, because we went over Alexander the Great, okay? And prior to Alexander the Great, of course, you have the battles between the city-states in the old Greco-Roman Empire. And, how much more they were able to accomplish once they stopped fighting over who gets what little bit of food. When they put their energy to creating more food, they suddenly could, right? And there are a lot of historians that I've read who believe that one of the root pieces underneath the Second World War was an attempt at garnering food resources, that Germany wanted food resources.
Well, that's interesting.
And, and if you look again at the displacement of the Native Americans, that was about food and getting farming land. So we have this need to steal resources instead of combining efforts and increasing resources. Because we can.
I never thought about that.
Yeah.
And as far as the Native Americans, I mean, you look at the locations of all the reservations, especially in Arizona.
Well, they put them out in the middle of nowhere where they can't grow anything.
Exactly.
Which is horrendous. It's to get them off the farmland so that those cash crops of tobacco and other weeds can be grown. Right. And if you look at different times in history, South America, there was a time prior to some things that happened because famines happen, but there was a time when everybody was fed, where they had taken potato cultivation and corn cultivation to the place where everybody had a base carbohydrate, enough food to eat.
Sure.
And, and a lot of those foods actually had more proteins in them than we have today, and they got more protein out of their plant systems. You can get a full protein if you know how to eat on a vegetarian side, or a vegan side. And you're not proteinless just because you're vegan. So, but you do have to have a lot of different things. And they had trade routes. We now see that some of the roads they had were in fact for moving food back and forth between center hubs and outskirts. And what happened to them? That, as far as I know, hasn't been fully figured out. Some of it's natural disasters, things like tsunamis and earthquakes and El Niños. We know some of it's El Niños, weather systems that have come in and totally, particularly devastated the coastal areas. So we've got all of this going on, and we still haven't really figured out. We've got hydroponics. We've got so many different ways to raise healthy food, and yet we sit and deplete the soils. So there's a lot of things that we could do better. There's a lot of room for improvement. And, and as I tell my students, there was that old song when you and I were younger, we didn't light the fire, but it's burning, right? But the world is turning. And so we're each invited to do what we can. And I hope that this upcoming generation puts out more of the fire and starts to move us into a better place. Do I think we're getting there? Slowly, but it feels like what the Luxembourgers used to call an Echternach March. And what that's a reference to. Echternach is not a very big part of Luxembourg. And the joke was that in order to have a parade through town, they had to take 2 steps forward and 1 step backward.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And slowly but surely they'd make it through the town. And so it feels like progress very often is an Echternach March. That's my old Goodyear stuff from Luxembourg.
What amazes me about, again, your school, Tom had a couple young kids who were working on citrus green.
Ah, yeah.
They have been They graduated from IRSC.
Okay, and they're working on that.
Immediately hired by USDA.
Yeah, so that is a big issue. Some of the other agricultural challenges that we're facing.
Sure.
The funguses in the potatoes. There's lots of stuff that happens, and it's not just about teaching our vegetables to take more Roundup.
That's a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, and as people discovered in Vietnam, Americans don't rot down as quick. We've got lots of stuff in us from our food, and we need to look at a lot of those things and how that's impacting our children. Because I don't think that enough studies have been done as to what the long-term effects. Medicine's getting so much more impressive. I was talking, with Stuart with medical procedures that have now become routine. That, I'll take for example a hearth catheterization, right? As one, because my dad came home from the hospital because in the city that we lived in, there were 2 hospitals. And they each had one cath machine, one of which was broken and waiting for a part to be shipped by boat from Europe because Germany had made the machine. And so he came home from one hospital to wait until there was an opening for him to be admitted to the other hospital because their machine was running.
Wow.
And he died of a heart attack one day before he would have gone into the other hospital. Today somebody comes in and they're right. If they've got a situation, they're right up in the cath lab. And I've been there. I've worked emergency rooms, and if you come in and you're in urgent need, you bump everybody else and you get right into the cath lab. And it's become a routine kind of thing. People do it and come home, and whereas he was in the hospital for about a week before they even considered scheduling him for it, because the machines were so scarce, and then he probably would have been in a week or 2 afterward. And my mother had a number of caths. I think she had 2 or 3 stents and all kinds of stuff in her life. And I watched as she got older how the process got more and more routine, to whereas today it's not. It's
real routine.
It's a very routine process, and so, that it's still a process. It's still a medical procedure. It's still something to be very cautious with, but it's not anywhere near, my mother was allergic to the dye. Now they've got multiple dyes that they can do, and it used to take them a day to prep her to take her into the cath lab because they didn't have as many choices. So we really have moved far afield, but we've advanced incredibly. The field of medicine is one of them. Agriculture has advanced incredibly. We need to bring some of these things, like to the problems of greening, like to the problems of algae.
And a lot of the land now that was citrus is now being aqua farmed.
Yeah. Well,
and I think that's very cool. And that's Harbor Branch is one of the leaders of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you can go down and see their work, and it's open there. So that's well worth doing.
Sure.
And so we do have some of these answers, but we're really doing it with an Estranacht March. We're really struggling to get these things moving forward. So this is as good a point as anybody, as any place to, again, wish everybody a happy Tu B'Shvat. It was New Year's of the Tree. And we now move forward. It's Purim is coming up very soon. It's our next holiday, the story of Esther. And I'll share more about that as we get on here. But let me also invite anybody who'd like to sponsor an episode or 3 or 4 or 5 of Ask a Rabbi to please do so. We certainly can use that support and that help. You can do that either by calling the station. You can call that 772-340-1590 and tell the station you'd like to sponsor a few episodes of Ask a Rabbi, or you can call the synagogue and we'll work with you and you can get the donation through the temple. Whichever way you'd like to do it, we certainly would appreciate if you like listening to me, if you like hearing what we have to say. If you've asked a question, please consider giving us a little bit of support or a lot of support. We'll take both.
And the young lady that was with you, actually, she popped in this morning. I think she won some fair tickets or something like that. So that was kind of cool to see her again. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So, and thank you. That's Sally Lloyd. who sponsored us a little bit earlier in the year. Thank you for that. We appreciate it, and look for anyone else who'd like to help join that. We certainly can use it. It makes a big difference. It makes it a lot easier. We are a small, struggling congregation. We're not very big. We're very intimate. As Stuart likes to tell everybody knows your name. And yes, Stuart is one of the members of our congregation. He's actually our founding president, and our historian now. So.
Oh, yeah. All right.
So we've got a great president, Patty Hinckley, right now. She does a wonderful job. We've got a great board that's moving us forward. We're looking to do more and more things like the 4 chaplains that we did earlier this month. That was not a celebration, a commemoration.
How did that go, by the way?
That went very, very well. I was very, very pleased. It was not super, super big, but we did have to put out more chairs. That's always a good sign.
You bet, yeah.
And a high five to the folks at the community center on Aroso, who handled it beautifully. It was much bigger than our little synagogue can handle right now. Yes, we are looking to move into bigger space. Hopefully I'll be able to announce something there before too long. But if you'd like to help with that, you're more than welcome to help with that as well. Lots of opportunities for you to make an impact in the Jewish community by working with us. Lots of different things that we can do. And so we're trying to do more of that kind of thing. The 4 chaplains is one of them. And that was great. Father Olto was there. Bob Carr was there, and Rob. Oh, I'm sorry, Rob. Rob's last name.
From Faith Congregational, maybe? Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, Pastor Rob. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah, Pastor Rob. That's part of why I'm.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised he was there. Yeah.
So it was a great crowd that was doing it, and Deanna Vole played music for us. And our own cantorial soloist, Karen Boyd, did a great job of leading the congregation in singing, those wonderful songs like Our Country 'Tis of Thee, This Land Is Your Land, obviously the national anthem. We've also played
Our Country 'Tis of Thee. What are they playing? British? British music? What is the deal?
What can I say?
Sorry.
Yeah, got it.
In the colonies?
Oh. Okay. So it was great, and again, the Civic Center, not the Civic Center, the Community Center. My mouth is not wanting to help me today. That happens sometimes. That's why I don't have my coffee today.
I was thinking of you yesterday. Dr. Shipe was talking about the Silk Road trade.
Yes.
And I was thinking, oh my goodness.
I talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
Because it was very, very important. So we'll flip back to talking with I was talking with my students about the impact of Alexander the Great, and people may not realize it, but one of the reasons that Aristotle was so influential is that he was Alexander the Great's tutor, and so all of the good stuff and the bad stuff that he taught, because he taught some really wacko things, and he did believe that some people were better than other people.
Aristotle?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, he also didn't like women, and we've got some of that was permeated into the known world courtesy of Alexander the Great. Yeah, so some of it's well seated, and we know that some of that influence ended up going into Christianity and into Islam, and Muhammad fought actually against the idea that women were so inferior. And the emphasis perhaps is on the word "so," because that was one of the things that after Alexander the Great, people had to fight back from. It wasn't the same influence in Jewish scripture because Jewish scripture was already, for the most part, closed. Hanukkah, which is a reaction to the Hellenization, is after scripture is closed Jewishly.
Yeah, you're saying basically Muslim and Christian were
much more influenced.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
they're much more influenced by Alexander the Great, and because of Alexander the Great, who one of the things that he did was mix everything up and kind of took this from there, and to his credit, he was trying to make Greek culture as good as it could be, and so he tried to grab everything he thought was good. Unfortunately, it got mushed in the process, and so some Zoroastrian concepts came in, but not necessarily the best ones. and sometimes yes, it varies. But like I said, the idea of inferiority of women is one of the things you can thank Aristotle for.
Did that touch any of like the Buddhists at all, or were they pretty much isolated?
They're still on the Silk Road.
Yeah?
They're still on the Silk Road. I mean, that's why it's called Silk Road, is because the Chinese kept the secret of the silkworm for a long, long time.
Ooh,
because that's why it's called the Silk Road, because they were the home of silk.
Sure.
And, prior to synthetic materials, silk was the be-all and end-all. And our young IRSC students have no clue of that because they've had synthetic fabrics their whole lives. But,
well, they never seen silk.
But, your and my grandparents certainly admired silk for what it offered. Now, the secret did eventually creep out of China, but it was kept there for a long time as a bargaining chip. It kept their trade high, but that's why it was called the Silk Road, because it was up and down that trade route that silk fabrics made their way to Japan and elsewhere, and Europe, and down into Egypt. It went everywhere on the overland and water routes that were part of the Silk Road. There's a John Green video that's on the Silk Road, and I get a kick out of it. He says, we call it the Silk Road, and it's not because it's made of silk or because it's an actual road, but simply that it was a way to refer to the trade routes that became much more established. And, of course, it wasn't that people traveled the whole length of the trade routes. It was that the goods traveled. And goods would go from A to B and get sold at B and then go to C, get sold again and go to D. And so by the time you got into Europe, silk was incredibly expensive.
Sure.
Right? In China. And people don't realize how much we're interconnected. Italy would not have pasta if it weren't for Marco Polo.
You have said that before. That's so hard to imagine, but yeah.
Marco Polo, his father and his uncle traveled into China for a number of years. Marco Polo himself became a minister in one of the dynasties. And then they decided they wanted to go back to Italy because the father and grandfather were getting older. And they took a princess in some kind of a marital treaty kind of agreement, because kids were used for that, especially daughters. And, what can I say?
Even back then.
Even back then. Well, certainly Constantine did it with his sister and then proceeded to kill her son so that there wouldn't be another claim to the throne.
Right.
But, history's full of these wonderful pieces. And so they go back to Italy and take with them what I'm sure in China was rice noodles. And because rice doesn't grow as well in Italy, it becomes wheat noodles, because wheat grows there. And
wow.
So the world is much more connected than we begin to think. And then, of course, the Italians take pasta they do take it to the next level, because now we have penne pasta and we have rotini and lasagna and you name all the different pastas. They had creative fun with it. You don't see that much diversity in the pastas that are used in China. You see some differing noodles that are wide or narrow, but you don't see all these really creative Renaissance kind of noodles.
The Indians in India.
American or Indian? Indians. Okay.
Again, seemingly
the Hindu.
A little bit more isolated, the Hindus.
Well, okay, so realize that way back when, most of the travel until the 1900s is going to be by foot or animal-drawn cart.
That's true.
So there's a limit to how much and how far you're going to travel, which is why goods traveled more than people, because that way they could get somewhere faster, because people did want to get home to their families.
You had ox carts.
Yeah. It wasn't all camels.
Still do.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that trade still happens. But India, the most populous country on the planet is China. The second is India, and then comes America. Right? So, gee, folks, that's one of the reasons why Christianity is not the majority religion. It's the largest, but that's only because it's defined so broadly. It's any religion having to do with the life, death, resurrection, and teachings of Jesus. So that includes Jehovah's Witness, Latter-day Saints, folks that some other Christians might not want to include in the umbrella, but they're there. And without them, you don't even have the numbers that you have, right? So it's Catholics, it's Protestants, it's all of the Christianities. When you say Christianity, it's not any one flavor of Christianity that's the dominant religion. It's all of the Christianities.
Right.
And you're not going to have that big a number unless you do that. And then the second largest is Islam, just because of the numbers. And then you've got Buddhists and Hindus that are also very large, largely because of the size of the populations that practice those religions. Religions are still, to some degree, indigenous. They still have places where they are practiced, and they are the dominant religion in those areas. So even China, which after the revolution tries to become atheist, doesn't really totally succeed. There's still a lot of religions going on inside the country of China. And they're becoming more open to it.
You hear a lot about mainstream Christian religions losing a lot of the faithful, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
How has the Jewish religion managed to maintain?
What we see is some shifts in where Jews affiliate and in how they affiliate. I think there are fewer congregations, but the number of people who self-identify as Jewish is still large. Now, that's a little bit... There are no easy 1-2 answers for any of these wonderful questions that you're posing. The largest group of Jews in America is Reform, which is a very small group in Israel. In Israel, they have what they call secular or religious, and when they say religious, they really do mean Orthodox or fundamentalist or the more extreme versions. But it's easy to be a secular Jew, and I put that in quotes, so you can't see that, of course, on the radio, but I'm making that motion with my fingers if you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook. And because the state's holidays match the Jewish holidays. So it's much easier to be a secular Jew and still have some minimal religious practices.
So would the Orthodox call the Reforms secular?
Oh, yeah.
Over there? Oh, they do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
There was an interesting, when I went to Israel, it was with the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia. And, I'm there in my slacks and my jeans, a typical American, typical Israeli for that matter, jeans and a T-shirt, nothing exotic. And I'm having this discussion with somebody, and they're saying, well, I'd like to do this on Saturday. And I said, well, I'm observant. I don't do, I do the Sabbath.
Sure.
And they looked at me and they said, you're in pants.
So what?
Well, because that doesn't meet the Orthodox
extreme
idea that, you got to wear pants.
Oh.
So, you can't wear pants, right? Because men wear pants. And,
Oh, boy.
Okay, so, any guy who wants to wear my slacks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
I consider my slacks to be quite feminine, thank you. Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's all of this other stuff that really has nothing to do with the religion.
It
really has nothing to do with the religion, but it's cultural. And sometimes it's hard to parse it. And sometimes you have to pay attention to it. And America, here's one of the things that I always say, one of the other classes that I sometimes teach is Religion in America, 1121, not the 1300, which is the standard world religions, but religion in America and how it influenced America. Every wave of religion that comes with every wave of immigration, because every wave brings new things. And America is both changed by that and changes the religion and feeds it back into wherever that religion is more indigenous. And so, we do see things that are changing. We see people that are looking at it and able to parse, what's the religious piece and what's the cultural piece. And, and that's part of this and that. There's a part of let's get back to the Middle East. A part of the conflict was the large amount of Jews in Europe who, when they came back to Israel, brought with them European foods and a European face, right? I look European. I don't look Middle Eastern.
Okay.
Right, but a Jew whose family has always been in the Middle East looks Middle Eastern. Surprise. A Jew whose family has lived in Asia looks Asian.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if
Sure.
you walk into the synagogue in China with the European face, they're going to say, "Funny, you don't look Jewish." Right? Because
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Right. And so my face is clearly European. My blue eyes, which thank you, Dad. I got those from him. And my mother had hazel eyes, so they didn't come from her. Part of it came from her, but part of it came from Dad. And but they brought with them European customs, European habits, European language, European clothes, and European foods. And so to the Middle Easterns, they said, yeah, Ashkenazi Jew, you're European. And if you listen, again, my Hebrew, if you listen underneath at the Hebrew that's going on between the Palestinians and the Israeli guards, when they're speaking Hebrew with each other at a border crossing, and the Palestinian is harassing the soldier or the soldier is harassing the Palestinian, the argument you get back from the Palestinians sometimes is, was your father or grandfather born in Europe?
Ooh,
so
okay.
It's this cultural piece that's bigger than the religious piece.
Wow.
Right? Because the Quran says we are all people of the book. The book. I think I might have just enough time to talk about this. And then next week, again, we'll talk about the garden because we didn't get through this week. But the book, if you look back in ancient times, they used scrolls. That's why the Torah is on scrolls. It's why the book of Esther is a scroll. That was the form of writing. You sewed parchment in long strips and wrote the entire thing, and then you rolled it up. And so if you were a school child back then, you carried scrolls. But then in this town called Byblos, they came up with the technology of sewing leaves of paper into bindings. And just as we call facial tissue Kleenex, because that was a brand, we call these codices, which is the correct word for it, Byblos, which is why you have a bibliography and why so many religions have bibliothèques and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's where that word is.
Byblos.
Byblos.
And that was the name of the town.
That was the name of the town. And so if you're going to have something that's the book, the Byblos, it becomes the Bible. What book would you use but sacred scripture?
Sure.
Which is why everybody who's got sacred scripture has got a Bible.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so when Islam says we are, we children of the book, let us not be different. Let us remember that we all pray to the Creator God. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about people who have sacred scriptures. And on that note, wow. I'm getting the music, so we'll talk more next week. This has been the February 14, St. Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Very secular holiday now in the U.S. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb. It has been a great time with you on Ask a Rabbi.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, WPSL.com, webcaster to the world.